Welcome to Finding Your Inner Mr. Rogers. I'm
Thank
Todd
you.
Faber, and I believe that in a world of noise and speed, the most radical thing we can be is kind. We often think of leadership as being in charge, but Fred Rogers taught us that true leadership is about being in service to the dignity of others. Today, we're joined by Carole Charnow. Carole leads one of the most beloved neighborhoods in the world, the Boston Children's Museum. With a background as a professional opera producer and a lifelong advocate for the arts, Carole understands that play is the serious work of childhood. Under her leadership, the museum has become a global model for inclusivity, accessibility, ensuring that every child, regardless of their circumstances, has a place where they are seen, valued, and encouraged to wonder. As the leader of an institution entirely dedicated to the work of childhood, much like Fred Rogers, she understands that play is the most serious business there is. Welcome to the neighborhood, Carole.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to have you here today. You are absolutely one of my all-time favorite people,
Thank you.
running my all-time favorite museum that I was going to 50 years ago as a kid.
Wow.
So it is an honor to have you here
Oh my
and
goodness.
and
Thank
and
you.
learn more about what you've been doing there and how your leadership has transformed the museum into what it is today. So, without further ado, let's dive in.
Okay.
So, Fred Rogers used to famously say that play is often talked about as if it were a relief from serious learning. But for children, play is a serious learning. In a world that is obsessed with testing and readiness, how do you actually protect the sacred space of play at the museum?
So, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, which I hope I can live up to.
You will, I'm
But,
convinced.
but as you said, Fred Rogers was really dedicated to play, and he talked about play being the work of childhood. So we know that all learning happens at the Children's Museum through play. And there's been a lot of evidence in the recent years about the intrinsic value of play. In fact, one of our former board chairs and current honorary trustee, Dr. Michael Yagman, had a very important paper in the Journal of Pediatrics, the Academy of Pediatrics, about the power of play. And he really talks about its importance in the development of language, social emotional development, cognitive development, fine and gross motor skills, etc. So, and also as a mitigation of stress. So play is absolutely the most important nutritional aspect of childhood. And of course, the first 3 years of childhood are extremely important in terms of brain development. So how do we protect play at the Children's Museum? Well, that is really all that we're about here at the museum. Everything we do is through the lens of play. Now, that doesn't mean that it is frivolous or it's any kind of distraction away from learning. We have very fundamental principles here at the museum. We call them the learning frameworks, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. But the learning frameworks, which really are about our dedication to play in all its forms, is at the center of everything we do here. So what I like to say is we kind of hide the learning in the fun and play, because the children just have a great time. And I think it's the parents and certainly teachers that come to the museum who really do understand that a lot of learning is taking place. So really, the way we protect play is that we make sure that everything we do is done through the lens of play. And I think we've been pretty successful at that for 113 years almost.
Yes, you most assuredly have, as I can attest to having been a participant in that play as well as being a parent of those who played. And of course, my
Wonderful.
wife, Jan, who's an educator, has been very involved. So, one of the things that I think you've done a great job, and and more places need to do this, and I think they're trying to, is we really talk about accessibility for everybody. And the museum, and again, having spent time there, is really known for their accessibility programs. Um, and what are sort of some of the things that you've done as a leader to ensure that your team ensures that every child, regardless of where they come from, what their physical ability is or not, feels that this neighborhood, right, this museum, which really feels like a neighborhood, was actually built specifically for them?
That is such a great question, and it really has been fundamental to my time here, my 16 years at the museum. So the first thing I want to say is we have a mission statement and we have a vision statement. And in the vision statement, I was just checking this yesterday in preparation for this conversation, we have a sentence that says, we promote the healthy development of all children so that they will fulfill their potential and contribute to our collective well-being and future prosperity. So it's this notion of all children. So we think about accessibility in a lot of different ways. So for a start, there are many learning differences that children have. There are many physical challenges and barriers that children have. And we have so many programs to ensure that not even one child is prevented from being here. So for example, for over 10 years, we've had a program called Morning Star Access, which is for children with autism and the most severe autoimmune illnesses. We do this program before the museum opens, so it's pristinely clean. Only 100 people are allowed into our 80,000 square foot museum at the time that we do Morning Star. And this has been seen over a decade to be an absolute lifesaver for so many parents with children who aren't able to play in the traditional sense. In fact, we've learned that some of the children that come here for Morning Star play with their siblings for the very first time. One of the children was able to have a birthday party here with their friends, which they had never been able to have before. So Morning Star is an example of the many, many things we do to invite children of all physical and emotional and mental disabilities. We also provide ASL interpretive programs. We have sound-reducing earmuffs here at the museum. We have wheelchairs. We have large print maps, assisted living devices, etc. So really, any child that comes to the museum, whatever they are dealing with, is able to really have a good time here. And I also wanted to talk briefly about economic access. So one of the things we know is that many of the children that need the museum the most for their brain development, for their language development, are those that can afford it the least.
Right.
So we have made sure over our entire 113 years that all children have access to the museum. But really, talking about myself as a leader, when I first came, museums are always struggling a little bit, museums. And there was an idea to change some of our financial access programs. But I really believed that access was so important to our mission that that was the only way that we would maintain our relationship to our very valuable donors. So for example, our $1 program, which we had for over half a century, I basically made a statement to our board and our CFO, et cetera, that under my watch as a CEO of the Children's Museum, that program would continue. It has gone on even through the pandemic and even post-pandemic. We offer $1 admission to anyone who comes on a Sunday afternoon.
That's
but
awesome.
I even felt...
I should have taken advantage of that.
Yeah, you should. But I even felt I should go further than that because one of the things that happens is a lot of people who are in difficult financial circumstances, they don't even know about the museum, or they don't know how to get to the museum, or they find it difficult to even think about going to a children's museum. So we partnered with Mayor Michelle Wu and the three other family institutions to create Boston Family Days, which is a free program for Boston school children the first 2 Sundays of every month. Any child, actually, not only school children, in the city of Boston can come to our museum for free with 2 adults. And this program has been going on for several years, and we are really committed to continuing it. And lastly, we were the founders of the EBT discount program in New England.
Really?
One of the things that I was concerned about, we had to raise prices several years ago, and I said, well, what are we going to do about the people who can't afford to pay the new price? And we created a program where if people came to the museum and showed their EBT or WIC card, they would have a $2 admission for each member of their family. That program was then adopted by the Massachusetts Cultural Council, and it was changed to be called the Card to Culture program, which is now offered in 600 cultural organizations in the state of Massachusetts.
That's amazing.
And we are so proud. They just had a celebration here, and they acknowledged Boston Children's Museum and myself as the leaders of that program. So, you know, when it comes back to leadership, you kind of have to put a stake in the ground of what you're going to, allow and what you're not going to allow. And for me, access was absolutely fundamental and primary to my time here. And I'm so glad that as I get ready to retire, all those programs are still existing and going strong.
Well, that will certainly be your legacy. And, geez, I think I should just stop right here, but I won't. So, the thing is, you talk about those programs, they cost money, because I'm assuming that you're not having somebody just drop a bag of cash on your doorstep once a week. So you have to be able to go out. And I know from personal experience that you've managed some incredibly large capital campaigns.
Yeah.
You've created these amazing urban partnerships. And when you think back almost 60 years ago, when Fred Rogers appeared before Congress, telling them why he needed money because of the impact that public television has on people. But he did it in a way that won over even his most staunch opponents on Senate. And so when you are in those situations, because a lot of the places that you go to for funding and fundraising, I got to assume everybody's trying to get in their pockets, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to differentiate yourself. And I guess my question is, how do you kind of maintain sort of that Fred Rogers level of kindness and empathy when you're sort of in these negotiations with a Michelle Wu or, the CEO of Sun Life or whomever you guys are looking to raise money from, so that you can kind of get what you want, right?
Yeah. So that's an interesting and complex question. I think for anyone who's raising money, you have to be a very good listener. You have to be a compassionate partner with funders. I always think of fundraising as relationship building. I kind of talk about it as courtship, and every person that you'd be raising money from, just like as if you were courting someone, needs a different kind of approach, needs a different kind of relationship. So I think for a start, you have to kind of figure out where is your constituency. So for example, the people that we even start our conversation with are already very inclined to support entities that are serving young children. So, that already gives you a head start. I mean, we're very lucky here at the museum. We're so well known and we're very well loved, and we have been for decades. So usually by the time I actually meet with a donor, they do know about us. They're interested in learning more. But, how do I make the case in a kind way? Several years ago, doctors and psychologists started understanding the importance of early childhood. I mean, I think we always knew this, but we learned about the neurological development of very young children under the age of 3. I think I've been able to, and all of us here at the museum have been able to make the case that this window of time when you have to actually reach out to a child and engage them in something like the museum is so crucial to their future development, to their ability to grow and fulfill their potential. So part of it is just making a really sincere and authentic case for the importance of the work that we do, and really showing them that, if you're able to get a child engaged in learning, in play, in developing all their different domains of that need to be developed in a young child, that, and make sure that they understand that it's connected to their future prosperity. So in other words, if you're going to see a large corporation, you have to help them understand that we are growing your future workers,
yes,
your future customers, etc., your future partners. And, I'm sure you know this because you are very philanthropic, is that it may take time to build a relationship. Sometimes people immediately say, okay, you got me, I'm giving you a grant. Some people take years, particularly if you're looking for a very large 7-figure gift. It may take years to prove that you are really authentic, that you're going to use the funds for what the purpose that they're giving for, etc. But again, I think I've been very lucky in being at the Children's Museum because my personality, which is, compassionate, I'm kind of an empathetic person, is very well suited to a children's museum. I'm not sure I'd be as good in a kind of cutthroat environment, if you know what I mean. Some of which you probably worked at as an attorney.
Well, I would actually beg to differ. You probably could turn those people into mush,
Yeah,
just like
maybe.
just like Fred did to those senators. So trust
Yeah,
me, empathy and
yeah,
compassion goes a long way to take the temperature down, and that's part of the
yeah,
whole reason in the genesis of this podcast is showing that even in the most cutthroat environments, we can actually do that. So I
yeah,
would not
yeah.
sell yourself short.
I think you're right. When, we have to advocate for museums and for our work, and I've been to Washington many times and spoken with senators both here and down there. And I think the storytelling is really important. Like I mentioned earlier about the stories of children coming to the Morning Star program. Those are the things that I think really move people. And we have so many wonderful stories of children growing and learning here and developing at the museum.
Well, it's interesting because you've alluded to your leadership style when it comes to fundraising and obviously your leadership style when it comes to children. But a big part of running an organization like this are your people. And one of the things that Fred Rogers was really good at it when you watch his shows is he was kind of the master of the pause, right? He'd ask a question and he'd give children time to think. And sometimes as leaders, it's hard to not provide that immediate response when somebody asks a question. And so, how are you able to kind of create space for your staff to explore, to fail, find their own solutions, grow within their roles, so that when you leave, right, you're leaving in a couple of months, the
Yeah.
legacy you leave behind isn't just the things that you've put in place from a programmatic standpoint, but the people that you've nurtured who are staying at the museum.
That is such a great question. And, I'm thinking a little bit about, I have 2 grandchildren now, and watching them experiment and explore, there's a part of me that wants to help them, get to the, be able to put the little blocks in the shapes and in the squares and so forth. And there's a part of me that says, no, 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 you have to let them figure it out. That's the whole, and it's really analogous to what goes on here at the museum because I think as a CEO, you look at the whole enterprise in the 360. So like I'm thinking about the audience, the board, the fundraising, the budget, the balance sheet, and of course the all-important staff and the culture and the mood, et cetera. And so there's so many things. So sometimes it's hard to let people fail because it costs money, it costs time, and it also costs morale. So I think as a CEO, you just have to really think carefully outside the box. I think one of the things I learned, I did a 2-year executive education program at the Kennedy School. And one of the teachers, the professors there, talked about getting on the balcony to kind of look down at yourself and have a perspective outside of your immediate emotions. So, for example, when you're in a meeting and someone's suggesting this thing that they want to do, and it's probably not going to work, rather than immediately responding and, just sort of, cutting them down, getting on the balcony helps me figure out how to respond. So I might think to myself, well, this is a really young person, and the risk is very low. And they're going to pretty much find out that it's not going to work. So rather than be difficult and just say no, why don't I just say, give them maybe a small suggestion to help them along the way and let them try it because maybe I'll be wrong. And maybe this time something like that will work. So I think there's a way of being very cognizant of your overarching goals, which is, like you said, to develop the staff, help them fulfill their potential, develop their passion and their ideas. In fact, I have a little fortune cookie thing on my desk here, which says, I always keep this: listen to everyone, ideas come from everywhere. So if you're going to be a person who takes in ideas from everywhere, you have to also be someone who's willing to take some risks within the realm of what you think isn't going to bring the company down.
Right, of course.
So I don't know if that answers your questions, but the last thing I'll say is we do a lot of small experiments here. So for example, when we came out of the pandemic, one of the things that came from one of our programmatic department, they wanted to do a summer camp, because I don't know if you remember, during the pandemic, a lot of the camps closed.
Yes.
And people were requesting that we do a summer camp, which we had never done before. So with my fiscal responsibility hat, I was like, oh God, how are we going to do this financially? It's going to be tough. There's some risk taking care of children, because normally we don't see kids, more than a couple of hours, right? But, I felt the risk was relatively small, and we did experiment with it, and guess what? It was a mammoth success. We sold out the camp in, I think, 2 days.
Wow.
And we ended up netting a small amount of revenue, but we did more than broke even. And we found that the staff, who normally are interacting with kids on a very casual, informal basis, really grew from this, seeing the same children over and over on multiple days. And what was really interesting is we become a camp where a lot of kids with special needs come to, because they
Because of
feel
your accessibility.
yeah, and the
Yeah.
parents, really love the staff, who are very focused on this inclusivity. So that was an example of a small experiment that maybe initially I thought, but I let it happen, and it's really been a great thing for us. And we're in our 4th or 5th year now, coming up to this summer.
That's awesome. And I think the lesson here, from my perspective, from a leadership, is two things. One, it's that idea of taking that 10,000-foot overview, right? Because that's what you've done when you sort of get on the balcony to kind of look over everything and see where you are, where you fit. But it's also, and I think this is a great quality in a leader, to say, hey, I'm going to let you try this. And guess what? When it works, I'll be the first person to say, okay, I
Well
was
done.
wrong.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
wrong, because we
Yeah.
always want to encourage people to learn from their mistakes and to own their mistakes. And it's hard to do that when you have leaders who don't, right? So if you're working somewhere where you have a leader who doesn't take responsibility for their mistakes, what's the lesson for the people around them? So the real lesson here is that your staff got to see that you didn't think it was necessarily going to work, perhaps, because you looked at the financial aspects of it, and it worked, and you're now a big cheerleader of it, and
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
wonderful thing.
I think to say mea culpa is really important for a CEO. I mean, I think one of the reasons I have such a loyal staff and so many people here stay for so long is that I am pretty transparent about how I think about our work and our decision making. And I have a pretty good sense of humor about myself, and I know what my shortcomings are, and I can be pretty open about it. So, I don't have any problem saying, I'm worried about this, I'm not sure it's going to work, but let's have a go. And then, as you said, when they do well, I just say, oh my God, you proved me wrong. I'm so happy that you did, And so Fred
That's where the
Rogers is
strength
very much in my heart, I can tell you.
that's where the real strength comes in humanity, is when we can own our mistakes and prop up other people when they've done something well. Um, I certainly struggle with that in my household. Um,
Yeah, me
with
too.
with a 24-year-old and a 22-year-old, and obviously having an exceptional wife who is a far better person than me. And it's tough for me to own my mistakes, of which there tend to be many. So I can appreciate when I see others in a leadership role saying, hey, you know what, it's okay.
Yeah.
Um, so speaking of, um, sort of the parent thing here, right? We're a parent of two girls. when, when, when you go to the Children's Museum, it's like, it's the same thing with Disney World, right? If the kids aren't crying, they're having a great time, and the parents are exhausted.
Exhausted.
They're absolutely exhausted. Or the teachers, right, who are there. And so you've got a staff, and the staff kind of has to manage the kids as well as the parents managing the kids. But how how do you teach your staff to kind of help care for the parents when you see a kid might be struggling and the parents struggling with the kid or the teacher struggling with the kid?
Yeah.
How do you teach them to kind of manage those interactions so that at the end of the day, the family walks away or the school walks away saying, this was a worthwhile use of my time and my child's time?
So that's again a great and complex question. So the three answers to that are training, training, and training.
The
So
trifecta.
yeah, training is absolutely paramount here at the museum. So people always say, can I volunteer to work on your floor? And the answer is sadly no. And that is because we have to have paid floor staff that are highly trained in not only taking care of children, but also supporting the parents. Every morning they have training. They have lengthy trainings on days off. Not their day off, but days when the museum is closed. We have training manuals, and we really encourage. So first of all, half of our attendance is adults. It's literally 50-50. I mean, every year we measure it. It may be 49-51, but it's typically 50-50. So we really think of the adults as important in our space as kids. And even though they may not be developing the same skills that the children are, we think of them as incredibly important partners in their child's learning. So for example, also, aside from the training, the space is very developed for parents. So to give you an example, we have an exhibit. It's called Play Space. It was the first exhibit in the world for children under the age of 5. It started in the 1970s when we were in Jamaica Plain. And that exhibit is designed now for children under the age of 3. So when we designed that exhibit, we're in the 6th version of it. We thought, well, one of the hardest things with a toddler, a very young child, is running after them for fear of them hurting themselves,
Right.
or pulling something down on themselves, etc. So we created this space, for example, where every area of this exhibit can be seen by a parent sitting comfortably in the middle of the exhibit. So if you go in, you find all this seating for parents that's right smack in the middle of the exhibit, and that the children can be seen whether they're on the climbing area, they're in the imaginative play area, the fine motor area, the water play. And the idea is that the parents can sit and observe their child, learn about what interests their child, see their interactions with other children, and talk to other parents. And this works really beautifully because we know in our surveying that people meet other people at the museum. They learn from other parents, and particularly when we are a polarized country and we're trying to bring people together, we have a very diverse population here at the Children's Museum. So many children who live in homogeneous neighborhoods come to the museum just to meet parents and caregivers and children that are different than themselves. So that's another thing. We designed the building so that the parents can rest. We also have signage for the parents that help them to understand the purpose of the exhibits. They're very inviting. We never tell people, parents or caregivers, that they can't do things in the museum. We don't have a judgment with them about using their phones, but we do invite them to observe their kids and to help to even enhance the learning experience here. And on top of that, we have a lot of resources for parents on our website. We do a huge amount of at-home activities. This started really during the pandemic when people were looking for things to do with their kids that they couldn't go to camp. They weren't going to school, so we have an enormous amount of online resources for parents. We send out twice a month, we send out these email blasts that have activities and other things that are going on in the community for parents. Plus, we have our own podcast. We've been doing our podcast since the pandemic, which really is for people who care for children. And it's about everything from literacy to mental health to physical health, to empathy, creativity, etc. So we really bend over backwards to try to support parents in every possible way we can. And, I also mean, when I say parents, I mean grandparents, aunts and uncles, and teachers, and anyone who comes to care for kids here at the museum. And lastly, I'll say we even have adult nights. You may know about the Boston Grown-Ups Museum, which we do. We have one coming up in a couple of weeks, where we invite families of parents to come, adults to come, 21 plus, to play in the museum like children. And the messaging there is that really we all need to continue to play as adults and to find the child in ourselves. So we do really think carefully about parents and caregivers.
No, I can certainly attest to that. And quite frankly, I probably never needed the adult days because
You were
I was
playing.
always that one dad who was stuck in the climbing thing, and my daughters are like, oh, they would just get kind of annoyed because I'd be just in there and they'd want to go on to the next thing. So, but I certainly appreciated it as a parent because I think it's important, right? You're bringing the caregivers there, and you want to make it an all-inclusive experience for everybody.
You do, because if the parents aren't happy here, they're just not going to come. It's the parents that, the kid may decide that's what they want to do, but the parents is the one that's going to say, yes, I'll come or not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to take you. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I think having that makes it a much better experience anyway, and the ability to be able to interact with your children, and to your point, even just to be able to sit and watch
Yeah.
what's going on is hugely important.
That is so important. And we do find that parents do learn about their children while they're here. It's one of
Sure.
the questions we ask on our surveys about what did you observe about your child. And, it does sometimes lead to other activities that they'll do, or even other kinds of help that they'll get with their child. We really do see ourselves as a help to caregivers, and we hope that they feel that way, which I think they do.
I again, speaking for myself, I can certainly tell you that we did,
Right.
and I'm sure I'm not alone. Uh, you know, One of the interesting things that I didn't know about you as I was researching you for the podcast was that you're actually a classically trained musician.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you knew this, but so was Fred Rogers.
I
Uh,
did. I read that about him, which I didn't actually know until you talked to me about this podcast, and I did a little research on him.
so I'm kind of curious because I mean, you spent, you were a classically trained singer. You were in England, in London, then you were in the opera house here, um, and we sort of like to think of our days, if they're really done well, it kind of flows like it's harmonic and there's a
Yeah.
rhythm to our days, right? If they're planned well.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious as to like when you think about your background, um, how do you sort of use that harmonic rhythm to kind of orchestrate the idea of kindness among your team?
Yeah, I love the orchestral analogy because when you think of running an orchestra like I have, or running an opera production, or a theater, or dance, which all of which I've done, is everything has to be come together in one beautiful work of art. So all the instrumentalists and the singers and the dancers and the scenic designers and the lighting people, etc. And I didn't discover really until I was almost 40 that one of my talents was bringing a lot of disparate people together to kind of fulfill their own creative mission and create their own art. And when you talk about kindness, it's not easy orchestrating a large group of people. And some of the people you've interviewed are orchestrating a lot more than I am here. But it does require a kind of a strength, but also a light touch,
Hmm.
because I think if you are too directive, maybe too bossy, or you're too
Heavy-handed.
heavy-handed is the word.
Yeah.
People lose interest, they lose trust, and they don't have ownership and buy-in. I mean, There was one thing that I wanted to do when I first came here, which I really felt that in order for the museum to really work well, everyone who worked in an office job should serve on the floor of the museum at some point during the year. And it just made sense to me because, if you're just sitting in your office or you're just fundraising or doing marketing all the time, you're talking theoretically about the experience children are having. You're not actually seeing it yourself. Right. Well, I could have, in year one, come in and said, this is going to happen. I did talk a little bit about it my first quarter of my years here. And I really got a lot of pushback. People were saying, we're already so stressed. We're so busy. We don't have time to do that. It's going to be da-da-da-da-da. So rather than just force everyone to do this, because knowing that if people did it grudgingly, it would not go well for the kids or the parents or anybody. But during the pandemic, when we started opening, even still when people were masked and we were socially distancing, we had to do it that way because a lot of the floor staff people left. They were really concerned about serving on the floor. We didn't really know how the virus was passed, etc. So the office staff started serving on the floor of the museum. Now, they needed a lot of training, as we spoke earlier. We didn't put them in the most high contact sort of areas because they just didn't have that experience. But slowly but surely, people started saying, I love this. I love being on the floor. I love seeing the kids. I love playing with the kids. I love seeing the caregivers. And then soon after the pandemic, we made it a policy that every quarter, every person who works on the floor, who works in the office, on the office side, administrative side, has to serve on the floor. And they can also serve, we go to many festivals and so forth, they can do that as well. So I think that was an example of, applying the Fred Rogers principles, is that, he really talked about you are one of a kind, you are special, you are important, and you should have agency. So it was kind of with the respect for each individual worker that I really felt I didn't want to impose this, but I had to kind of find a way to persuade them of the benefits of it. And so maybe I employed a little bit of Fred Rogers in how we did that, and now it's just such a great benefit because the floor staff don't feel isolated from the office staff, and the office staff feel like they know the floor staff by name, and they really do get to know the kids, and they also get to know how hard it is to work with those kids, 8 hours a day, and they have more compassion and empathy for all the people who work here now.
Well, which is hugely important, especially at a nonprofit, right? When nonprofits have their deficiencies, typically how people are compensated.
Yeah.
So you really have to be wed to the mission.
You do.
And I think that's a wonderful idea that you put in place. And it's certainly one that you could look back on and go, well, in this case, I was right.
I hope that was, yeah.
Because when you're wed to the mission, you're wed to the mission. So you enjoy coming to work every day. You enjoy picking up the phone and making the phone calls to try to raise money. You enjoy sort of the back office thing because that supports what you saw on the floor when you served on it. So I think that's a really kind of wonderful way to create a harmonic community or a neighborhood within your staff, right? Because, it kind of reminds me a little bit. I don't know if you ever watched Friends.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
There was an episode where Joey was working as a docent in Ross's museum, and all the scientists sat at this table, the docent sat at this table, and the tour people, and they were all sort of sitting separately and distinct. And you sort of looked at that and laughed, but it was like high school, right? Where certain people sat at this table, and you've created a neighborhood within your staff by showing everybody, hey, this is what they do. And I think that's a wonderful thing that you've accomplished. And certainly that'll be a huge part of your legacy because after you leave, they'll certainly continue that.
I hope so. But the one other thing I wanted to say, Todd, that I think is really important, and this is how we develop culture any kind of organization, whether it's a for or nonprofit, is through shared values.
Mm.
You know, during the pandemic, or maybe even a little before, we did develop our kind of values. And we try to keep those values in front of us about, you know, being respectful, being creative, helping each other to fulfill our goals, etc. And it is part of our annual reviews, and it's part of what we talk about when we make our goals annually for our work. And I think it's taken a while. You know, kind of developing culture, I think, takes quite a long time. I think, you know, people talk a lot about culture in organizations, but they don't always achieve it, because I do think it takes time to have the right people with the right values, the right combinations, the right structures, and the right policies to really fulfill your dream of the kind of culture that you want to have in your organization.
I think that when we talk about sort of the underpinning of what it means to be compassionate, or how you can be compassionate, how you can be empathetic, how you can be kind, and developing things like good culture, it takes patience.
Yeah.
And when you know that, when you are patient and you say, hey, this is going to take a while to get in place, it will happen because you're being patient and you're evaluating it at each step of the way. And every great leader has that sense of patience, and they're not rushing, like we talked about earlier, with, you know, getting your, you know, answering questions for staff and letting them kind of find it out. That's a big part of this. And I think we need more of that. We need a little more patience. There's this rush to get things done and get things done based on deadlines that for the most part are typically artificial anyway, because they're self-imposed. So when you can exhibit patience, you can create this culture, and
Yeah.
you do it by being compassionate, being empathetic, and being kind. And clearly, you know, you have exhibited all of those things throughout your career, both at the Opera House and here. And speaking of exhibits, you know, when I look at the museum, and again, I've been going there for 50 plus years, um, it's full of artifacts of our childhood. And if you can kind of take that notion of an artifact and put it into a lesson, what would be one kind of invisible lesson that you would look for from Mr. Rogers that you would put into a permanent exhibit for adults who go there to see every day? Like, what would that lesson be?
You know, we have an exhibit here that is very dear to my heart. It's called You, Me, We. And it was done during the pandemic after George Floyd was murdered. And there was a tremendous amount of pain in the city of Boston, as you can imagine, and elsewhere in the country. And we were trying to renovate an exhibit that was about the black neighborhoods of Boston. And you know, one of the things about Fred Rogers, and I remember as a child watching his shows, and he had that. There was a song, I believe, about "You are special."
Yes.
You are very special, and you are one of a kind, and you are unique, and that is so intrinsic to the mission of the Children's Museum, which is really about giving children a sense of personhood, that they have an important voice, that they have an important contribution to make. And this exhibit, which is on the third floor now, is really called You, Me, We. It's about you as a person, me, and us together, we. And I personally felt very dedicated to making this exhibit happen. It was not easy because it was going to be complex, because when you start talking about identity, it becomes, you know, there's a whole realm of how people identify themselves, of course, not only by race and ethnicity and language and gender and wealth and location. I mean, it becomes very complicated. And we wanted to create an exhibit where everyone would see themselves and adults would really understand that what we were trying to say is your child is special and unique, and they are important as an intrinsic member of our community. We finally finished it. We raised all the money. We opened it, and we did a survey with the adult population to help them, to help us understand whether they were getting the point. And what was really remarkable is that a very large portion, over a third of the people that went to that exhibit, understood that what we were trying to do was help them give their child a sense of their own specialness, of validating their identity, and helping them to understand that people who are different than them were also important in their own way. A third of the other two-thirds are interesting. Another third didn't think about it when they were in the exhibit, but when they filled out the survey, they said, wow, now that you mention it, I see
Get
what
it now.
the
Yeah.
exhibit was about, and we want to come back. And a third of them were like, I was running around with my 2-year-old so much I didn't even get a chance to think about it, but I will come back. But my point is, so what artifact? I mean, literally, there are artifacts from our collection in that exhibit, particularly from religious celebrations of all kinds, which I think is really an important part of identity. But really, in the end, it does embody this idea of you are special, you are the only person like you, and you matter to me and to our world. The intrinsic value, the personhood, the agency of an individual. And I hope that that exhibit will be there for a long time. And it won a very special award a couple of years ago from the American Alliance of Museums. So we're very proud that it was recognized nationally.
That's awesome.
And yeah, we just hope that, we can continue to have adults understand the message there, that not only is their child intrinsically important, but so they are too.
I think that's a wonderful message, and I will end it with you are unique and one of a kind,
Thank you.
and you have had a tremendous impact on the city of Boston.
Thank you.
So we appreciate you very much, and I certainly appreciate you coming on today and sharing all these wonderful stories and your impact that you've had and the leadership that you've had for so many years at the Children's Museum and before that at the Opera House. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh my goodness, it's been a tremendous honor, and I've learned a lot about Fred Rogers, so I have to go back and watch some of his shows. Thank you, Todd. You're a great interviewer, too.
Well, I appreciate that, and you have a great rest of your day, and we will talk soon.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
You too.